The first cestodes I want to talk about is the Taenia genus, as in Taenia solium and Taenia saginata, which will be illustrated under these tints. Now, eating cysts or larvae of these parasites in undercooked meat will lead to tianiasis, which leads to GI problems. So now what type of meats are generally the culprits? Well, the intermediate for saginata is cattle, which we'll draw under this tent, and the intermediate for solium is a pig, which we'll draw under the other tent. So to keep these two straight, let's draw a sun on the pig's tent, as in sol for solium, and additionally we also have a sign that says sold. The cow's tent is sagging a little bit to remind you of saginata. There is another differentiation between these two species that we want you to recognize. We'll represent it by drawing some meat hooks surrounding the pig's tent. Notice there aren't any on the cow's tent? Well, these hooks are supposed to represent the hooks which are present on the proglotted heads of Taenia solium, and they show up on stool O and P. So here's a picture of solium on the left, and you can see these characteristic hooks compared to saginata on the right, which lacks hooks. Alright, moving on. There is yet another disease that can be caused by this parasite, and it's called neurocysticercosis, which we'll illustrate here on the right with this circus-themed carousel. Cercosis sounds a lot like circus. See how all the animals on the carousel are either cows or pigs? So remember, this is still caused by Taenia cestodes, but neurocysticercosis occurs when people ingest Taenia eggs that are floating around in water contaminated by animal feces. So let's add a puddle of poop water here for dramatic effect. Eating the eggs themselves causes the parasite to go to the brain and form cystic brain lesions. These brain lesions have the potential to cause seizures or hydrocephalus. If you take a look at the carousel, one girl is still clinging to the carousel for dear life, and the other is flown off into the cheese stand. Her crashing motion lines are to remind you of seizures, and the cheese on her head is not because she's a Packers fan, but because neurocysticercosis looks like Swiss cheese on head CT. And here's an image of the characteristic findings seen on MRI. So you should suspect neurocysticercosis if the patient is an immigrant or farmer and has seizures or symptoms of hydrocephalus. Alright, before we talk about treatment, I just want to hammer in this point one more time. Ingesting the cysts or larvae of the Taenia genus will cause tianiasis, which is usually asymptomatic but may cause GI problems or malabsorption. Ingesting the eggs of the Taenia genus in feces-contaminated water may cause cysticercosis, which can lead to the development of lesions almost anywhere in the body, including the brain, eyes, and skin. When these lesions are in the brain, it's termed neurocysticercosis. It's really important that you understand this distinction in transmission. So while we're at it, let's add some cheese wheels that have fallen off into the poop water that look like eggs, to remind you it's ingestion of the eggs that lead to cysticercosis. So treatment of these cestodes will involve the use of praziquantel, which we'll illustrate with this pretzel stand here in the front. Pretzels will remind you of praziquantel and will be our recurring symbol for this drug throughout the parasite videos. However, if the person has neurocysticercosis, additional treatment with albendazole is necessary. So we're going to add this circus sign here with a strong man named Al bending a bar, our recurring symbol for bendazoles. And you can remember that you need to treat neurocysticercosis with bendazoles because it's on the circus sign. Alright, time to move on to our next worm, and it's a mouthful. Diphyllobothrium laudum, otherwise known as the fish tapeworm. It's transmitted by eating uncooked or undercooked fish, and we'll illustrate this with this guy back here who's just eaten some bad fish and is running towards the bathroom. Bathroom sounds somewhat like bothrium, no? And who gets fish at a carnival? Jeez. Anyway, he's running towards the porta potty that has a stand next to it that says, "Must be 12 to buy fireworks." First of all, that's a really young age. Where the heck is this carnival? Second, why the B12? Well, the fish tapeworm resides in the small intestine and causes diarrhea, hence the running to the bathroom. And it's also associated with B12 deficiency, leading to megaloblastic anemia. So here we're going to draw a B12 firework, but another name for B12 is cobalamin. So we're adding a nice cobalt blue firework. If you look up, some fireworks are bursting into giant red circles that look kind of like red blood cells, which should help you remember megaloblastic anemia. Get it? They're blasting because they're fireworks. Now, another interesting fact about the tapeworm is that it's the largest tapeworm and can grow up to 10 meters long. So we're going to draw this guy here who's leaving the porta potty and has an embarrassingly long piece of toilet paper stuck to his shoe. So this is again to remind you that it's the largest tapeworm. Also, see how these individual squares of toilet paper are being broken off at the end and left in the mud? This is to illustrate how to diagnose a fish tapeworm infection. It represents the proglotid segments that break off and can then be seen in the stool OMP, which in this case, the stool is the mud. Anyway, treatment of the tapeworm will be with either praziquantel again, or a drug called niclosamide. The praziquantel is being represented by this guy eating a pretzel. Niclosamide will be illustrated by adding this coin box to the porta potty with a sign asking for a nickel to use it. Nickel for niclosamide. Okay, time for the last tapeworm. And going on with our animal theme, this is going to be our sheep tapeworm, named Echinococcus granulosus. This tapeworm will be illustrated by a dog show that's happening in the back. It turns out that the grand winner of the dog show is a Cocker Spaniel. We chose a cocker because it sounds like Echinococcus. The second place dog is a sheep dog, and we made it so because even though the dogs are the definitive hosts, sheep are the intermediate hosts. So we have a sheepdog to remind you of sheep. So where do humans come into play? Well, humans are the incidental hosts that accidentally ingest the eggs from dog feces that could contaminate food or water. So we're going to draw in a pile of poop behind our winner to remind you of transmission through dog feces. Guess our boy got a little too excited about being the winner. Anyway, the sheep tapeworm causes a particular liver abnormality called hydatid cysts. On imaging, it'll look like a slow-growing tumor, which could be concerning. However, there is a buzzword that you should remember when discussing CT imaging, and that's eggshell calcifications. If these are seen inside a cyst-like mass in the liver on CT, suspect Echinococcus. Let's draw in the first place trophy in front of our proud Cocker Spaniel. It's a golden cup, and what better way to film that cup and make it farm fresh than with a giant egg? This is to remind you of these eggshell calcifications. To remind you of the characteristic cystic liver abnormalities, we'll draw the first place winner ribbon on this dog's liver spot here. The shape of the ribbon actually looks kind of like the hydatid cysts that you'd see on CT. And here's a CT scan of the liver showing that. The real trouble comes when the cysts rupture, which could cause an anaphylactic reaction and an acute abdomen, which is why surgeons will inject these cysts with ethanol or hypertonic saline to kill the cells before attempting to remove the cysts. Our prize giver had to learn this the hard way. He's removing the ribbon from the second place dog, and he's starting to have an anaphylactic reaction. See how he's all red and puffy? And the ribbon is falling apart in his hands, which symbolizes that the cyst is ruptured. And when this happens, if the cysts were in the lungs, you would even see hooks in the patient's sputum. When trying to diagnose a Echinococcus infection, a lab finding you may see is eosinophilia, a finding which is ubiquitous amongst helminth infections. We'll illustrate this with the return of our EO slingshot kid, also known by his mom and 4th grade teacher as Phil. When he's not fighting crime with a team of nematodes, Phil is an avid patron of state fairs and carnivals. A lot of fun, unsuspecting moving targets for him to shoot at. Once again, notice his orangey pink outfit and bilobed slingshot, which are just like the nuclei in eosinophils, with granules spilling everywhere. Okay, well, it looks like we're all done with the cestodes. All 3 of these types of worms are pretty high yield, especially with each of their major associated clinical findings. And again, those are Taenia's neurocysticercosis, Diphyllobothrium laudum, which causes megaloblastic anemia, and Echinococcus's hydatid cysts that may lead to anaphylactic shock. It's a lot, but hey, at least there aren't any clowns, so don't be afraid to come back and check out